Started.
Thank you. I see another one of my blood relatives joining us from across the border. So, okay, Chodesh Tov, everybody. Mar Cheshvan, they say it's a bitter, bitter month, and hoping to add some comfort to our bitterness. That's our theme for today. I admit that at first I was a bit stumped in terms of what to talk about for Cheshvan. I know I probably could have, we're allowed to talk about anything in this venue, but I think it's nice if we can make it timely. And so, in my investigation, which time dependent, I might talk a little bit more about how I figured it out. But I figured out that because I don't usually follow so much the Yortzites of Tzaddikim and Tzaddikot, it's not really my brand of Judaism necessarily, but I was able to discover that Rachel, or matriarch Rahel Immeinu, actually died in Cheshvan. So that kind of sparked my thought process and led to what I would like to share with you today. I'm going to tell you now, although I'll maybe remind you at the end, I'm a huge, huge fan of us getting together virtually and or in person to learn and teach together. You should know, as you can hear from my bio, that I do this professionally. So I'm going to have slides and stuff like that. That being said, we have had lots of other amazing speakers who do this kind of stuff on the side and didn't necessarily, who spoke beautifully and didn't necessarily have fancy slides. So if you're thinking about volunteering, I hope it's okay for me to say, Rachel, that please, we're looking for volunteers, and please, everyone can do it in their own style. And I think that can be a really beautiful thing too. So I thought I would just kind of announce that from the start. All right, so going over to the screen share, it has been ages. I did this so much last year, but I'm teaching in person this year, so it feels weird to do it, but I'm going to go over to the screen share and share my slides with you. My gosh, I hope I remember how to do this. Yeah, great. Here we are. Share. No, I didn't mean share. Sorry, I meant present. Right. Okay, so I think you guys are seeing a gray bar on top. That's for my controls. Hopefully, that's not going to block any of the words that I have that I want to start. Sorry for making you dizzy from the beginning. All right, here we go. Here's our title, Rahel Immeinu, our matriarch Rahel. Terafim, we're going to explain that. Red strings do that, and then hopefully get to the idea of comfort, or maybe see that all the way through. I think comfort is probably a good thing altogether, certainly in these uncertain times, certainly as the nights are getting earlier and it's starting to get a hint of colder. We can buckle down and feel comfort, hopefully, the warmth coming in of fall. And we're going to see how Rachel and a lot of things associated with her, hopefully, I'm going to demonstrate how they're associated with comfort. And really, a lot of it has to do with what we call her, Rachel Immeinu, our mother. So here's a little reminder about who Rahel is in terms of the scheme of the our ancestors. Jacob, our third patriarch, or one of the third of the Avot, has four wives or two wives and two almost wives, and Rahel is one of them. Okay, so you can see the pictograph here about who has how many sons. I love here the picture here of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat or Ketona Hapasim. And Rachel, who we're going to see, compared to, for instance, her sister Leah, who has so many sons, Rachel has only two. She suffered emotionally tremendously until she was able to have them, and then actually died in childbirth when Benjamin was born. So we'll end up addressing that a little bit as well. So she's got a bigger story. We are zeroing in on one aspect of it. Well, to start off with, at least, and it has to do with this particular pasuk. The word here, terafim, appears. I think sometimes I spelled it with PH and sometimes with an F, so I apologize if there's any confusion around that. It's always spelled with a F in Hebrew, though. So the idea here is I left the word in Hebrew because it's a confusing word, and that's why we're going to talk about it more. So I think everyone hopefully is familiar, at least with the basics of the story. At this point in her story, though, basically Yaakov has gotten fed up with all of the mistreatment of his father-in-law Lavan, who is both Leah and Rachel's father, and decides that it's time to get up and go and leave and start out on his own, on their own, with the kids that they have so far. On their way out, which is done kind of secretly, Rahel takes something with her from home that seems to be not just her own personal possessions, but it says here, quite frankly, something that belonged to her father, and it is his terafim. It's an unusual word, but it is used elsewhere in the Torah or the Tanakh, excuse me, and so that can help us understand potentially what it is. Just as a head, well, no, I'm not going to tell you any of the English translations yet. Let's get to the commentary, at least that I want to focus on. There are many. The convenient thing about Ramban's commentary, Nachmanides, is he gives his own, but he also tells us Rashi's at the same time. So we're getting kind of two for the price of one. He quotes Rashi's, and clearly he's not so satisfied with it. So he goes on to some other interpretations of his own. So the terafim in this case, we're assuming, as is true for most of the English translations you would have seen, is that it means idols. Okay, so usually we hear the word idol, like statues, and there should be red lights going off in our mind, like wow, 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 like that's not allowed. Jews don't have idols. So we have to remember, of course, that this is way, way, way early in Judaism. And also, of course, Rachel, even though she is from the extended family of Abraham, she married in to Abraham's direct line. And, it seems like her father, Lavan, had not got on board with the whole monotheism thing quite yet. And it becomes clear that her father still was an idol worshiper. So most of our English translations have the word here idol, or idols, plural, excuse me. So this would be a little uncomfortable for our ancient rabbis to have the, for our ancient rabbis to have our holy matriarch Rachel have idols in her possession. Okay, so that means that we have to explain why that is the case. As we see here, so I'm going to, I think, minimize these pictures. So, oh no, I did the wrong thing. I want to make sure you can see the whole screen. There you go. So Rashi says that Rachel's intention was to wean her father from idol worship. This is language of Rashi. That's how Rambam is quoting it for us. So basically, Rachel is doing it practically a mitzvah, that her father's an idol worshiper. On her way out the door, she takes away her idols with her, presumably to discard them, and therefore save her father from the sin of idol worshiping. So I would say, I wrote the Rambam didn't say this, I added this onto the screen, that Rashi is trying to make Rachel's actions kosher. By saying that, well, why would she have idols in her possession? Of course, it's in order to get rid of the idols. Okay, that's a very standard explanation, one that I'm probably sure you have heard before. But clearly, Rambam is not comfortable enough with it, or not satisfied, let's put it that way. So he has some other things to say about it. First of all, he wants to explain for us here that in fact that these really could have been idols, and this shouldn't be so much a surprise
Okay,
to
we only have
us.
5 more minutes of eating. We're going to finish up now.
Hi. Oh, Ahuva, I think your voice was on. Um, Sorry. Here we go. So, use it, that is clear from the Bible itself that Lavan was an idol worshiper, and later when he catches up with Rachel, he complains that she has stolen his gods, and there a more explicit word for God is used than our confusing word of teraphim. But Rambam is pointing out for us, sometimes the word teraphim is used for a different reason. It's used in Shmuel Aleph here, for instance, as part of a scheme when I think it's Michal that is kind of hiding the fact that David has escaped, and she kind of stuffs his bed to make it look like he's still there, and she uses teraphim to, be the kind of like the form of human beings. So that could be a kind of statue, maybe. But what Ramban is saying, that of course King David would never have idolatry in his home. So it really must mean something else. Okay. So it is something unusual, but maybe it's not actually idolatry. So he gives us two options as to what it could be, what they could be. So they are either vessels to receive a knowledge of the hours. So we can assume this is probably some kind of sundial or something like that, something that tells the time, an ancient form of clock, or something that they use for divination, otherwise known as kind of like prophecy, kind of like magic. They divine with them in order to gain knowledge of future events, in order to tell the future. Now, you probably know that this kind of trying to tell the future without having a direct connection to God, being a prophet, is something that is actually not allowed in Judaism, and is actually quite close to the idea of witchcraft and idolatry. All those things tend to be lumped together. Nevertheless, I guess Ramban is less concerned about acknowledging or associating Rahel with those items, as opposed to actual those kinds of items, rather than actual idols. So that this just explains this other slide. I'm not going to go into it, how it is that they could have been these forms of divination used for divination or divination or telling the future. So if we step back for a minute and we think about this, if so, I'm asking the question here, is Ramban actually implying that Rachel Immeinu, our foremother Sarah, took magical items with her when she left her father's home? Like, he's saying it's not idols, but he's saying it's magical items. And this isn't magic, like a magician today, like a hat and a bunny rabbit or whatever. This is magical items in the time of the Bible. What if it's something to do with the idea of controlling of nature, which actually is seen as a kind of forbidden act, even like idolatry itself. So he's not saying that she took idols in order to save her father's soul, to take them away from him, but rather that she took something magical with her. So when we think about the idea of magic, and this might be a bit of a segue, but I think and hope you'll see where I'm going. Generally, we don't think about magic if it relates to, divination and trying to control nature, and kind of like idolatry with our sainted foremother, Rachel. But there is another interesting, or perhaps related, um, custom that has grown up around her. So if you Google Red String in Rachel's tomb, you'll see that for sale on the internet, you can buy something that you have probably seen before, and maybe you've seen people sell them in Israel. You can buy a red string to use as a bracelet that allegedly was wound, and maybe actually was, I'm not sure who the seller is, um, wound around the tomb of Rachel, and is then believed to have special restorative, perhaps magical, perhaps comforting powers. So, sorry, that's my power bar here. Let's go back to our slides. Here's a drawing, actually, of the tomb of Rachel in Israel, in Bethlehem. We'll talk about that in a minute. So if we're thinking about the idea of Rahel, Immeinu, and the concept of magic, I brought you to the idea of the red string, which I think you've all seen it before. I'm not sure all of you know that there is a connection here that is made. Now, by the way, when I say there's a connection, don't like just sign off now and assume like, oh, Anna believes that there's magic in red strings and it's directly due to Rahel Immeinu. I think you can tell by my tone of voice that I don't believe that, but I think it's a very interesting idea to explore because clearly there are many people that do. All right, so beliefs connected to tying a red string around your left wrist, especially in connection to the tomb, of Rachel Immeinu, are said to ward off bad luck, bring a good shidduch, cure infertility, and protect from violence. I see there's something in the chat here. Is it for me? Oh, good. So people are starting to share superstitions and and red red string and red ribbon stories. So good. We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. All right, let's go on to our next thing. So the idea is these particular beliefs, like the belief that maybe the Teraphim could tell the future, by most the majority of rabbinic tradition, going all the way back to the Talmud, as we'll see, would often associate that with something called an Amorite tradition, as in the Amorites and the Amoraim in the time, not Amoraim, the Moab and whatever Amorites in the time of the Torah, they associate it with witchcraft, which is a big no-no also in Judaism and even idolatry. So on one hand, we have the comfort, right? This is the thing I was talking about, comfort and magic and red strings and teraphim, taking a souvenir with you from home. The idea of comfort that is so closely related with our mother, Rachel. Mothers also are providing of comfort. And yet we're going to see a tension because it's not so clear, even though these feel like very Jewish ideas, it's not so clear that the rabbis have always been, ancient as well as modern, so much in favor of them. Here's a more modern picture of the tomb of Rachel. All right, so while we're talking about the tomb of Rachel and magic, I also wanted to have another kind of segue into the idea of comfort in Rachel. Rachel, of all of our matriarchs, is known particularly not only for her story in the book of Genesis, but also as part of a very well-known prophetic statement by Yirmiyahu. It's actually read as part of the Haftorah for a second day of Rosh Hashanah. And it is here, Kol Ramah Nishma, a cry is heard in Ramah that Rachel on high, at this point, Rachel in heaven, the same Rachel in heaven, is crying. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. So here we have this woman who is well known amongst other women in the Tanakh as well for being infertile at first, and then having a miraculous birth, first of Joseph, and then of Benjamin, also miraculous, but very sad because she actually dies in childbirth. When she dies in childbirth, she is buried in Beit Lechem, which is not where all the other matriarchs and patriarchs were born, in Marat HaMachpelah. And we'll talk about that location in a minute. But that particular location in Bethlehem, where this tomb of Rachel still stands today, is a place that people go for comfort because, or have, I'm not sure actually if Jews could even go there anymore, but it's a place that's traditionally known to go for comfort. It's where a mother who cried for not having her own children finally received comfort, and a mother in heaven who now cries for us, her children, who are in exile, and tries to implore God to give us comfort now, namely to let us come back home again to Israel out of exile. So we see we have this idea of motherhood, of comfort, of home, and even if we need something magical or a red string or superstition, whatever, somehow to tie all those ideas together. we have here, I have a quote here from the Hertz Chumash. As I said, this this quote that I gave you from the prophet Jeremiah was the Haftorah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And it says there, I guess exactly as I said now, that here is a woman who's known for weeping for her children. She longed so much for children. She even considered herself as dead without them. That's the quote that she gave. And now she continues to cry for children. But now the children are all of us, all of the children of Israel, who now she suffered and now we suffer by having been in exile. So there I actually have it in Hebrew for us, but I gave you pretty much the essence of it now. So we have the idea of mothers, we have the idea of comfort, we have the idea of home. But now let's think about how magic, which we also have, is somehow tied in with that. Before we get there, though, we should talk a little bit about the permissibility of magic. As I said before, these practices that seem like we're trying to control nature without God in the picture, uh, that is magic, is very worrisome and troublesome to our ancient rabbis. There are many, many passages in the Talmud and other texts about it. This is one of the most famous. It is from the Mishnah. It is a statement that sounds very, very strange to us. It is about the particular malacha of carrying on Shabbat, particularly when there's obviously no Eruv in place, as we are blessed to have an Eruv in Toronto. We tend not to think about these things, but there is forbidden work on on um, on forbidden work on Shabbat of carrying things outside of your home. Okay, so I just am looking at the comments for a second. Sophie says we're still allowed to go there. Grandmother's red strings, her burial in Bethlehem. Oh, Shana said to me privately, foreshadowing Rachel's exile in her grave on their way out. Yes, that was part of the Hebrew midrash that I skipped for us, but that's absolutely correct. The idea is that Rahel was buried in Bethlehem because she happened to die there by the side of the road, but it is bashared or convenient to us, however you look at it, because that means she is on the road and is able to be in our way, basically, as we are being exiled in order to intervene on our behalf to God to bring us mercy and bring us home as soon as possible. So this idea of carrying on Shabbat, and there was a question in the Mishnah about what could be carried if it could you carry something if it was a matter of health, a matter of perhaps life and death. And apparently, because of course, in pre-modern times, with a different understanding of science, as we will see, that we have now, there were these beliefs that certain amulets, certain special items that you could have with you, could bring you, well, I imagine comfort, but in particular, actual healing in this case. So again, very strange to our ears. For instance, a locust egg, a fox tooth, a nail from the crucified. Now, I checked, this is not Jesus, by the way. This is anyone who has been crucified as a type of, um, as a type of punishment, capital punishment. So that apparently there was a belief, according to even Rabbi Meir, one of the most famous rabbis in the time of the Mishnah, that all of those things were legitimate types of healing, and therefore you could hold them with you close to your body where they were doing the healing, even on Shabbat, even when you were out of the home, and even without an Eruv. The rabbis prohibited, though, those remedies, not only on Shabbat because of caring, but even during the week because they smack too much of that magic that is not allowed due to the prohibition of following the ways of the Amorite. These are superstitious beliefs and the customs of Gentiles from which one must distance oneself. So here's this idea of wanting to bring comfort and healing, but the idea is no. In this case, Rabbi Meir says it's okay, even okay on Shabbat, but the majority here in this case says not allowed because it is magic and therefore idolatrous, because if you try to control nature from an ancient perspective without the use of God, you're probably trying to get other kinds of powers involved in this healing process. And those other powers really are idolatry. Okay. Now that is investigated further in the Gemara, that idea, where they talk about Rabbi Meir's opinion that he's the one that, permitted it. And he's a pretty important, famous guy. So the Gemara now has to explain why it is that he would have permitted it, even though it seems like the majority of rabbis did not. And they explain that these seem to be have actual curative powers. They believe that. So in this case, they're seeing it almost more as medicine, which has a whole other issue of Shabbat, but as a type of medicine as opposed to a type of magic. For instance, they even explain the locust egg is to cure a toothache, an earache, excuse me. The fox tooth is to help you sleep better. The live fox tooth is to make you more awake if you sleep too much, and on and on. I don't have to get to all the details. And so they are trying to explain that no, this isn't magic, according to Rabbi Meir, but it's medicine. So, and then they clarify that even further, where they finally give an opinion that says anything that has an element of healing, again, into the realm of medicine versus magic. And I think that we could argue in ancient times, at least to our eyes, there seems to be a very fine line between this medicine and magic, but they saw it as medicine, and that therefore it's not the ways of the Amorite, it's not illegal magic, and so you're allowed to use it. And the interesting thing is, you're even allowed to, and this actually continues throughout the Middle Ages, where there were different alchemists and people involved in writing amulets and all kinds of things, kind of a pre-medical magician kind of way, that there were questions about whether you could utilize the services of non-Jews as well. And non-Jews also came to Jews for those services. And generally, not a rabbi, generally those were allowed because of the importance of, really, we're talking about here also is not just safety and security, but sometimes pikuach nefesh, like you do have to do in order to save a life. Okay, I see another question. Is Rabbi Meir Baal Hanas? I don't think so. I don't think that's the original Rabbi Meir we're talking about here. Like Rabbi Meir as in Buria's husband, what husband. So I'm not really sure. I don't think he's necessarily always associated with that. All right. Now I've brought us here some Rambam. We saw Ramban before Nachmanides. This is Maimonides, who is going to further explain this idea of the permissibility of amulets. So fascinating to me, though, in terms of seeing things in kind of a historical progression or not, because Rambam, as you probably well know, is famous for being a man of science of his era, Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, and also even a physician. Okay, so I would have thought before I read this that Rambam would say, fox of a tooth, like what's that going to do? Clearly, that's not magic. That's, excuse me, that's not medicine. That's magic, and therefore it should not be allowed. But clearly, in a pre-modern time, again, that fine line between magic and medicine, I'm surprised on the side that Rambam came out on. So let's read it here. It is not inconsistent that a nail of the gallows and the tooth of a fox have been permitted to be used as cures, for these things have been considered in those days as facts established by experiment. So interesting is sounds like he's using scientific language. He's trying to acknowledge that in the past, maybe they did accept it. And then I figured he'd move on from there and say, but we don't anymore. But he kind of doesn't say that. He says they served as cures in the same manner as, I guess, what he does now, the hanging of the peony, like flower, over a perfect person subject to epileptic fits. I don't think all the opium could drip down from the peony to solve the epileptic fits. I think this seems more magical to me. Or the application of a dog's refuse to the swelling of the throat. I really hope that's on the outside. Or the vapors of vinegar and I don't even that is marcasite to the swelling of hard tumors. So these are all things that would sound magical to us, and yet to Rambam that he saw that as medicine, so that all of those things would be permitted and would not be seen as magic. For the law permits as medicine everything that's been verified by experiment, although it cannot be explained by analogy. The above named cures are permitted in the same way as the application of purgatives. Please don't share any Facebook cures with me about COVID at this point. Okay, but it is a very interesting thing to think about. When does something move from experimental, fantastical age sometimes into actual science, and sometimes it never does. Okay, back to the chat for a minute. Magic, oh, good line, Shayna. Magic is just science we haven't figured out yet. Okay, maybe we'll see. I need to have experimental data, scientific data to actually prove it. So once we're talking about the permissibility of amulets and the idea, back to what we were saying before about comfort, right? The idea of comfort, the comfort of home, the comfort of a mother, the comfort of a mother who needed comfort herself. I mean, I see these themes coming together. I want to share with you this idea of, like, we all think we're so modern, and yet people already have shared already on the chat about, red ribbons tied around their babies' cribs and other things like that. Um, when people are suffering in any manner, shape, or form, they look for comfort. And comfort can come in science, but sometimes science doesn't have all the answers. And so I think that we tend to look for comfort in other places too. Hopefully, not to the negation of science, but rather in addition to science. So I was able to find this on the web. It was actually another article that was about amulet use in Judaism. And it was a fascinating, I didn't read the whole journal article, but it's an article that studied the use of amulets in the pediatric ICU ward among Israeli and Arab families at the Asaf Harafa Hospital. Thank God I do not have experience with this, but I can only imagine that the pediatric ICU ward is a place that that comfort is really needed. Of course, for the patients, but I'm assuming for the patients' families as well. And so they're there in the hospital. They believe in science. They're using science the best that they can, but they're looking for more. They need more. And so there's in our tradition, as is true in other cultures as well, other ways perhaps of helping to offer that comfort. And it might seem a little bit magical, but I think it would be hard, as this quote says, it would be hard to argue with a family who was in need of that comfort based on their sick child, that they shouldn't try to utilize magic in addition to the science, of course. Of course, I'm always, never to the negation of science, in my opinion. So the conclusion of this particular article, journal, it was an academic journal article that says, the authors say, we believe that the frequent use of talismans or amulets as found in this study, and they listed all the things that people used, whether it be hamsas or letters from famous rabbis or a dollar bill from the Lubavitcher Rebbe or all different kinds of things. We express the family's need for emotional and psychological support, in addition to obviously the scientific support they're getting. We further suggest that this issue be taken seriously and that not to make fun of it, as sometimes scientists would, and that consideration be given to increasing the involvement of psychologists in the global care of the critically ill child. We also contend that a greater awareness and follow-up by the staff is needed to understand, help, and encourage families who use amulets as an extra treatment for children in the ICU. So it's an interesting sensitivity to this comfort that's needed, even if it means relying on these hopes that seem to be based in magic, in addition to, and magic that is grounded in tradition, not just magic they made up on their own. In addition to, of course, all the scientific support that they would be getting after all they're in the hospital. Um, okay, so we can share more ideas of these uh, um, about superstitions in general. Maybe if we want to open up to that in a minute, and comfort. But I just want to kind of tie it up with seeing this a little bit through a feminist lens. We've been talking about Rachel, we've been talking about motherhood, and we've also been talking a little bit really about folk religion because superstitions and amulets and magical rites or private rites of things that happen in the home amongst Jews, absolutely, as well as in other religions of the world, tend to be more in the purview of women. So let me just share this statement that I have from you from the Women's Experience of Religion from, oh, I forget right now. I took this quote from an Encyclopedia of Religion that was actually addressing women, particularly in the Near East. So it was actually mostly talking about Muslim and Jewish women. Traditionally, women in all of the major religious communities in the Middle East and North Africa have had less access to religious learning. We know this to be true until 100 years ago or whatever, or less. Women still, even today, do not necessarily learn, equally to men when it comes to Torah learning. And certainly before then did not have the access, with a few rare exceptions, but for the most part. So I would add here religious learning, and then in particular, public religious ritual, namely in the synagogue, active involvement in the synagogue, then have their male counterparts. They, women, have been excluded from the formal clerical hierarchy, couldn't be rabbis. Sorry, Soph. And their active role in official and public communal rituals has been to different degrees limited. So basically, in the public sphere, women's roles, especially in religions that came out of this kind of ancient Near Eastern milieu, have been very, very restricted. So as I said, the article was about Muslims and Jews. So it says here, Muslims women's access to the mosque has been restricted, as has that of Jewish women to the synagogue. And these restrictions are sometimes more the result of tradition than of Jewish law, which is religious law, which is another interesting discussion in and of itself. So you might say, well, if that was the end of the story, then that is in fact, that's very sad, potentially. But then, as I put here and right at the bottom, the article continued. At the same time, women have created their own rituals. Okay, some of these ideas about, first of all, let's talk about Rachel and taking those teraphim with her, experience of women surrounding, childbirth and infertility and sickness would have been all home-based before the, invention of modern medicine. And and death also happened at home. And so a lot of those things women would have been very, very involved in. And so women, not to mention, of course, preparation for holidays and Shabbat and everything else. Women have created their own rituals, which allow their active involvement in a different way in gender segregated settings. And those things often happen in the private sphere. So it's a very interesting thing for me. I think that ties in a lot of things we're talking about in terms of that we weren't talking about only women, but really for the most part, women were very involved in these issues of home and magic and ritual and amulets. And again, back to our mother, Rachel. Um, but it's an interesting thing for me to think about also as being interested in history and religion, in that there is perhaps a whole body of these ideas, these thoughts, these feelings, these superstitions, which were passed down in the home by women, usually mother to daughter, that because they were never actually written down and they're therefore available to us in kind of a traditional way, like book form, have perhaps been lost to us. And sometimes just hints or echoes of it, like this red string, like this red ribbon, are preserved, but maybe less of it has been lost. So, excuse me, more of it has been lost. So it's very interesting to me because in general, it said here about restrictions that women have had in the past. In general, if I have the option, I would rather be in a mixed gender setting, especially when it, halacha allows it for learning Torah like we are now, for all different other things. But I also am beginning to realize in my as I get older that even though I so very much rejected the idea of women's only setting and women's only experience of religion before, that perhaps by ignoring that we are ignoring a rich history of our foremothers from before who, received comfort in this way, who practiced their Judaism in this way, who shared ideas of Torah, not on the internet, but maybe on Rosh Chodesh. So just to come full circle in a way, just to share one more idea that isn't directly related, but is kind of related. As I told you, I picked the idea to speak today about Rahel because um, her her Yortzeit basically falls in Cheshvan. So how did I find that? I found it because I was a little desperate in terms of what I wanted to talk about. So I was flipping through Sefer HaToda'ah, Kitov Sefer HaToda'ah, which organizes different special days, Hagim and otherwise, according to the calendar month. So it's written by a rabbi, written by a man, written I don't know how many years ago, and it's on a book on the shelf. Um, However, as part of my research and thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I discovered that Rahel died during Cheshvan using a different tool. I found it by accident, quite frankly. And that is by finding a text that was a women's only text that is preserved for us today from a body of work, again, whole other talk that we could talk about, called, and you'll excuse my Yiddish, because I know no Yiddish at all, but techinas. So techinas were special kinds of, not techina the food. Techina is a type of prayer that were said almost always in Yiddish and almost always by women and almost always in the home. And some of those, they have been preserved for us in book form now. And there was a special techina. Oh, that's another idea that I wanted to talk about too, but I'm going to leave that out. A special techina that was said for Shabbat Mefarchim Mar Cheshvan, which would have been last Shabbat. And in it, a woman was meant to recite it and talk about her hopes and prayers for the blessings she would hope to receive for the coming month for her and her family. And it usually is on the merit of our sainted ancestors, usually from the time of the Tanakh. So in that Tichina from Shabbat Mavarchim Rosh Chodesh Mar Cheshvan, at least one of them, there might be others. I have it here in the Open Siddur project. It's here in the Yiddish. Actually, again, I don't know. And it says, Master of the cosmos, you listen to the prayers of all people. We come now to sanctify the months of Mar Cheshvan. And now, please, God, listen to my prayers. I'm assuming this happened at home while the new month was being blessed in shul on Shabbat morning. If the woman was at home, she would have recited this prayer instead or in addition to. So there's a number of different themes in it. There's a different one for every month. But here we have here in the month of Mar Cheshvan, another significant thing happened. On the 11th day, our mother, Rahel, bore her son, Binyamin. And then because it was a difficult delivery, she died. So here if I had looked in a woman's only work, I would have found also that a text that was created not necessarily by women, but certainly for women and recited by women. They were very popular. We know this in terms of they're only since the time of publishing, of printing press. So they were printed, and we know many, many copies of these kind of works were printed. And this is it's interesting because I could have found out that Rahel died in Cheshvan by using this source rather than the one that was written by a man mostly for men. I could have found it out this way as well. And in it, of course, here she talks about, or the Techina, the blessing, asks for, it talks more, asks for comfort, really asks for comfort and safety and security, which are, again, the things we've been talking about all along. And basically, it says here the Jews, when they were passing by the grave of of Rachel going into exile, as Shana said, they actually cried out to their mother, Rahel, mother, mother, how can you watch this, that they lead us into exile and make us suffer? They're looking for comfort. They're looking for comfort from at the tomb of Rachel at that time, from their mother in heaven, who they're hoping is going to intercede with God and bring them as much comfort as they can get. So those are some ideas I wanted to try, hopefully bring together to share with you on the merit of Rachel, of course, and to talk about the idea of the need, the human need for comfort, the desire to attain it through whatever permissible way possible, as bizarre and strange it may be, unscientific as it may seem. And it's an idea that is ancient, and we're all human. We're human, ancient humans and modern humans. I think we all need it. So obviously there are limits, like everything in Judaism, but I think that it's a very interesting tradition, these traditions, and they help us understand that we as Jewish women are part of a very special link of traditions as well. We can fully jump in with the more male-oriented traditions, but I think that we can be um, happy to embrace the more female-oriented ones as well. Anyone want to share any superstitions or traditions or have any questions?
Thank you, Anna. I was just going to say that some of those things kind of end up, I mean, at least when I was growing up,
Mm.
became like segulas, or,
Oh yeah, that's
right?
another good word for it. Yeah,
Like, etrog jam and drinking the
right,
wine from from the Kiddush cup, from the Sheva Brachot is going to help you get married. And yeah, like there's so many of them, and people who are otherwise fully rational, people who don't like ascribe to, magic or superstition,
I know.
will really buy into them. And like, from the perspective of, let's say, infertility, you'd think that like, okay, the
Right,
person is probably pursuing medical treatment, but is also feeling that like, or medical issues in general,
right,
they're looking for something additional, like that source from the hospital,
right.
from the hospital study. But for some of the other stuff, it's sort of a bit strange.
It's a bit strange. I mean, I think a lot of these things having to do with, these household rituals, um, often have to do with people that if we have a lack of power, whether it's women have a lack of power because they're not in the men's world, or as human beings, that we only have so much power because we're not God. And yet, people suffer or people have questions and they search. And sometimes science and regular book learning and regular liturgy, sometimes it's just not enough. And I think that my younger self, when I was not as tolerant and not as hopefully open-minded, I'm more open-minded now. I'm sure I always have further to go. That I used to really laugh and scoff and say, like, that's crazy. But, you know, if it's within the limits of our tradition, if it's not hurtful, if it doesn't negate the wonderful, wonderful, things that science can bring us, then, like we say nowadays, like, why not have a full toolbox of things that can help? And um, you know, I think and I think so personally, I think I have a more of a sensitivity towards it now, maybe understanding, and I'm quite pleased to see that our tradition does as well. Both our informal, private traditions of women and even the ones discussed publicly um, in the Mishnah Gemara and by the famous rationalist Rambam himself and scientist Rambam himself. Okay, thanks for being here to learn some Torah. I think it's a very special use of our time. And
Yes.
I look forward to next month. Next month is
So,
Sarit's beaming in from Israel.
yes. So first of all, officially, thank you, Anna, for that really interesting talk. I've got lots of, conspiracy theories in my head. No, I'm not. I'm joking.
Science, by the way, underlying everything. Science, 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 science. Okay. I definitely put science and
No,
all the other stuff too.
no, really, really, really interesting connections, I think, that you made for us tonight, and to think about it as Zohar said, during COVID is a really also the context for everything, right?
Right, exactly.
So thank you. And next month we do have Sarit Perlman, Rosh Chodesh Kislev. I think it's booked for November 5th. The shul is going to send it out. I believe it's going to be a lunchtime, so that the time zone will work out. But I believe
Okay, so that's
they'll
how it
send
works.
out. And we're looking for volunteers, as Anna plugged at the beginning. Please step up. You do not need to have a PhD. You do not need to be a teacher.
No,
We're really interested
you
in
don't have to have
hearing.
slides.
Yeah. You don't have to have a source sheet. It's just really, we love hearing from different perspectives and different voices in the community. So just send one of us an email, or let the shul know, or Jonathan Parker on the Adult Education Committee. And we'd be happy. I think we're looking for someone for Tevet, and then Shayna will be leading us for Shvat. I believe that's the lineup. So thank you all so much for tuning in tonight, and Chodesh Tov.
Thank you.
Thank
Chodesh
you.
Tov, everyone.
Bye,
Today and
Anna.
2 days worth. Okay, thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye. Good night,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Rachel, as well.
Thank
Chodesh
you.
Tov.
Thank you.
Bye.